The sun crested the eastern peaks, bleeding amber light across the valley floor. Emma Collins stood at the absolute edge of the ridge, her boots braced against the loose shale. Below her, the forest stretched out like an endless, breathing ocean of pine and cedar. She waited for the first birds to break the stillness, but the air remained hollowed out by the lingering cold of the night. There was no hum of traffic, no distant sirens, no vibration of a city waking up. Just the slow, deliberate crawl of shadow retreating from the timberline. She drew a deep breath, tasting the sharp, thin oxygen of the high altitude. This was the boundary where her life began and the modern world ended. She reached out and gripped a weathered branch, feeling the rough bark bite into her palm, an anchor against the vast openness. For these few minutes every morning, the silence was absolute. It was a weightless, total isolation. She watched the gold light catch the canopy, knowing that the trees were already moving, growing by fractions of an inch, indifferent to the pace of anything else on Earth. Emma turned away from the ridge and started the descent toward the lower trails. Her boots crunched against the dried needles, the sound rhythmic and steady. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, a sharp, artificial sound that cut through the forest air. She pulled it out to check the time, but a notification caught her eye instead. A group photo from a former classmate showed a glass-walled office overlooking a sprawling urban skyline, the caption boasting about a year-end bonus. Emma stared at the screen for a moment. She pictured the fluorescent lights, the constant hum of climate control, and the relentless pressure of a desk-bound life. She slid the phone back into her pocket and kept walking. The trail ahead was steep, demanding her full focus. She knew the reality of her bank account. Her peers were trading their days for high salaries and the promise of future status. She was trading hers for the smell of damp earth and the ability to watch the seasons shift without a clock. It was a choice she made every morning, even as the numbers on her paycheck remained static. She reached the bottom of the slope and wiped the sweat from her forehead, feeling the weight of the trade-off. The forest offered no wealth in the traditional sense, yet she continued to walk deeper into the timber. By the time the sun dipped behind the western ridges, the physical toll of the day settled into her muscles. Emma sat at the small wooden desk in her station, the room illuminated by a single lamp. She accessed her bank portal. The numbers blinked on the screen, static and predictable. They were not numbers that built empires or funded luxury. They were the baseline of a life spent in the service of the land. She calculated the rent, the fuel for the truck, and the basic supplies for the coming month. The remainder was thin. It was the reality of the ranger life, a quiet trade-off she had accepted years ago. She looked out the window at the dark silhouette of the mountains, acknowledging that the path ahead held no promise of traditional wealth. There would be no sudden promotions, no corporate bonuses, and no rapid ascent in status. She tapped the screen, closing the window. The silence of the station felt heavier now, underscored by the realization that her current trajectory led to stability, but never to abundance. She leaned back, listening to the wind rattle the window pane, and considered the gap between the life she lived and the financial security she lacked. The challenge was not the work, but the limitations of the path she had chosen to walk. The fire was her only company as the night deepened. Emma sat on a log, the heat radiating against her knees, watching the flames lick at the dry cedar logs. She pulled a book from her pack, the spine worn from years of use. Napoleon Hill. She had picked it up on a whim during a trip to town, more out of curiosity than expectation. She flipped through the pages, the firelight flickering across the lines of text. Then, a single sentence caught her eye and held her. Riches are determined by habits, not just income. She read it again, the words cutting through the exhaustion of the day. For years, she had viewed her limited salary as a locked gate. Now, the sentence acted like a key. She looked up from the page, staring into the embers. The forest around her was a system of slow, deliberate cycles. Why had she never applied that logic to her own resources? The frustration that had plagued her earlier that evening began to dissipate, replaced by a sharp, cold clarity. She realized that she had been waiting for a windfall that would never come, while ignoring the power of the small, consistent actions within her reach. She closed the book, her grip firm, and stared into the dark. The path forward was no longer a mystery. It was a process. The next Monday, the station felt different. The light filtering through the window seemed sharper. Emma sat at her desk, but this time she did not review her expenses or calculate the cost of fuel. She opened a browser window, the screen glowing against the backdrop of the morning fog. She navigated to a brokerage site. The interface was foreign, filled with terminology that felt disconnected from the rhythm of the woods. She created an account, her fingers moving slowly over the keys. She linked her bank account, the connection feeling fragile and abstract. She entered the figure, $200. It was a fraction of her paycheck, a sum that seemed almost invisible against the vastness of her long-term goal. She hovered over the confirmation button. The silence of the station returned, but it no longer felt like a cage. She clicked. The transfer processed with a dull, mechanical chime. She watched the confirmation message appear on the screen. It was a small act, devoid of fanfare or immediate reward. There was no rush of adrenaline, no sudden surge of wealth. She simply watched the balance update, knowing that this tiny, humble movement was the first link in a chain that would eventually span decades. Emma returned to the browser window before the morning fog had lifted from the valley. She navigated to the settings menu, her cursor hovering over the recurring transfer option. She set the schedule, monthly. The amount was fixed, a portion of her salary that she would no longer see in her main account. She confirmed the setup and closed the browser. The act was final. In the weeks that followed, the world outside her station continued its restless pace. News alerts flashed on her phone regarding market volatility and sudden economic shifts. She saw the headlines screaming of crashes and uncertain futures, but she did not log in to check her balance. She did not adjust her settings. She left the automation to run, undisturbed by the noise of the global markets. The transfer happened like the changing of the seasons, independent of human anxiety or temporary trends. It was a mechanical, silent rhythm. By removing the need for daily decision-making, she transformed the act of saving from a conscious struggle into a background process. She focused on the trails, the maintenance of the park, and the growth of the canopy. The brokerage account grew in the dark, fed by her consistency and protected by her refusal to react to the chaos of the outside world. She had built a system that functioned without her direct intervention. The seasons cycled, blurring into a steady rhythm of green and gold. Years passed, measured not by calendars but by the height of the saplings she had helped protect. While her friends in the city moved through cycles of rapid consumption, replacing cars and chasing the latest tech, Emma stayed on the trails. She watched a particular oak sprout from a tiny acorn, its progress barely perceptible from month to month. It required decades to even begin to tower over the canopy. This was the pace of her life. One afternoon, a friend visited the station, showing off a new vehicle that hummed with expensive precision. Emma listened to the talk of loans and deadlines, then turned her gaze back to the dense forest floor. The contrast was stark. The car would depreciate, its value fading with every mile, while the forest deepened its roots. She felt no envy. She walked the ridges, breathing the mountain air, and found a profound sense of contentment in the stillness. She was not racing against the clock. She was observing the slow, inevitable climb of the wilderness, and for the first time, she saw her own life mirroring that patient, quiet expansion. The forest did not rush, yet it achieved greatness. She chose to do the same. The equilibrium broke with a suddenness that felt foreign to the mountains. The headlines shifted overnight. Words like recession and market collapse began to dominate the digital feed of the world beyond the ridge. The volatility was not just a fluctuation. It was a downward spiral that gripped the financial landscape. Emma saw the notifications pop up on her screen, each one more urgent than the last. The numbers associated with her portfolio began to retreat, shedding the gains she had accumulated over the previous years. Outside the window, the forest remained anchored, but the digital world she had tied her future to was shuddering. The atmosphere at the station grew heavy with the news. She heard the radio reports, the frantic commentary, and the predictions of a long-term decline. It was the first time the system she built faced a genuine threat. Her peers were calling, voices tight with anxiety, discussing liquidation and the fear of losing everything. The pressure to act, to pull back, and to stop the bleeding was immediate. She stood by the window, watching the trees sway in a steady, unbothered wind, while the screen in front of her blinked with red arrows. The test of her resolve had arrived, and the silence of the woods felt thinner against the roar of the global panic. The red numbers on the screen continued their descent, signaling a deeper slide into the economic abyss. The global consensus was clear: sell, preserve, and retreat. Emma watched the market ticker crawl downward, the speed of the decline contrasting with the stillness of the trees outside her station. She did not reach for the phone to join the chorus of panicked voices. Instead, she sat down at her desk, the wood cool and solid beneath her palms. She logged into her brokerage account. The interface was sterile, indifferent to the chaos raging in the headlines. She bypassed the warning prompts and the flashing alerts urging caution. With a calm, deliberate motion, she adjusted her monthly transfer. She did not just maintain her position, she increased it. She bought more while the rest of the world liquidated. The transaction went through with a quiet chime, a small digital pulse in the middle of a global panic. She stood up and walked to the door, stepping out into the crisp mountain air. The wind moved through the pines, constant and unbothered by the turbulence of distant stock floors. She felt no adrenaline, only the quiet certainty of a long-term plan. The market might be failing, but her ecosystem was expanding, one strategic purchase at a time. The screen went dark, and the pull of the mountain returned. Emma walked to the edge of the ridge, where the soil met the rock. At her feet, a single oak seedling pushed through a patch of moss. It was tiny, fragile, and barely visible against the vast slope. She knelt, brushing away a layer of dead leaves to reveal the acorn shell still clinging to the roots. It would take decades for this sprout to reach the canopy, yet its trajectory was already set by the rhythm of the seasons. She looked at her portfolio not as a collection of numbers, but as this patch of earth. Each monthly deposit was like the slow accumulation of rain and sunlight. The forest did not rush, yet it achieved grandeur through sheer, unyielding repetition. She traced the line of the bark on a nearby trunk, feeling the rough texture of years of growth. This was the logic of the wild. If she treated her savings as an ecosystem nurturing the soil, protecting the roots, and letting time do the work, the result was inevitable. The market could fluctuate, but the growth was biological, steady, and relentless. She stood, watching the wind move the branches, and felt the connection solidify. Wealth was not a sprint. It was the quiet, persistent expansion of a forest, one layer at a time. The seasons turned, repeating their cycle with a predictable rhythmic grace. For Emma, the middle years were defined by a profound lack of spectacle. There were no dramatic market surges to track, no headlines to justify her choices. The novelty of the brokerage account had long since faded, replaced by the mechanical, almost invisible habit of the monthly transfer. She found herself at the station, filling out incident reports and mapping trails, her mind rarely drifting to the numbers on the screen. Once, she paused with her finger hovering over the login button, tempted to see if the balance had shifted. She stopped, pulled her hand back, and instead picked up a shovel to clear a blocked drainage ditch. The work was physical, repetitive, and yielded immediate, tangible results in the mud. She realized the digital wealth required the same detachment. It grew best when left alone. Her discipline had hardened, moving from a conscious decision to a core component of her daily rhythm. She no longer checked for progress because she no longer doubted the outcome. She had stopped watching the clock, focusing entirely on the landscape. The foundation was set, buried deep and silent beneath the routine of her life, unshakable and waiting for the momentum to take hold. The calendar turned to the 10th year, and the landscape shifted. Emma sat in the quiet of the station, the evening light stretching long shadows across her desk. She clicked the browser icon, the routine so ingrained it felt like a reflex. The page loaded. She expected the usual incremental rise, the slow climb of a steady, modest effort. Instead, the numbers stared back with a new weight. The compounding effect had crossed the invisible line. What had been a slow, agonizing trickle of savings for years had transformed into a surging, undeniable stream. She leaned back, the chair creaking against the wooden floor, and looked at the screen. The growth was no longer just the sum of her monthly deposits. The capital itself was now doing the heavy lifting, generating more value in a single month than she had saved in her first 2 years combined. She felt the sudden, sharp shift in gravity. The forest metaphor had held true, but the scale had changed. This was no longer a seedling struggling in the moss. It was the tree itself, deep-rooted and expanding with a momentum that felt entirely beyond her initial input. She closed the window, not out of indifference, but out of a sudden, quiet awe at the power of the cycle she had set in motion. The shift became impossible to ignore. Every month brought a new statement, and every statement revealed that the gap between her salary and her portfolio returns had vanished. Emma stood in the station, watching the sun crest the horizon, and calculated the numbers in her head. The forest had become a metaphor for a machine she had built, a silent engine of growth that never slept. She spent her days clearing debris and marking trails, work that required sweat and constant vigilance. Yet, while she was hauling timber, her capital was working in the background, out-earning her wages with an efficiency that felt almost alien. It was a strange, disorienting freedom. She looked at her hands, calloused and stained with the grit of the mountain, and realized the physical labor was no longer the primary driver of her security. The wealth had reached a critical mass. It was self-generating now, a runaway train of value that defied the constraints of her ranger paycheck. She felt the weight of years of discipline lift, replaced by a clarity that was both cold and exhilarating. She was no longer just a ranger working for a monthly wage. She was an architect of a system that had finally found its own rhythm. The momentum was not just building, it was carrying her forward, independent of her daily effort. The station door swung open, and a junior ranger stepped in, his face tight with irritation. He dropped a stack of budget reports onto the desk, the paper sliding across the wood with a sharp hiss. He had been tracking his own savings for months, and the numbers were barely moving. He looked at Emma, his eyes searching, his posture tense and leaning in. "I know you have a system," he said. His voice clipped and hurried. "Tell me the trade. What is the algorithm? Which stocks are you watching?" He wanted a shortcut. He wanted a name, a ticker, a single move that would bridge the gap between his entry-level wage and the security he saw in others. He paced the narrow room, his boots heavy on the floorboards, radiating the frantic energy of someone who believed wealth was a sprint. Emma didn't look up from her logbook. She continued writing, the scratch of her pen the only sound in the room. When she finally stopped, she didn't offer a spreadsheet or a secret tip. She simply stood, walked past him to the window, and pointed toward the tree line. The friction between them was palpable. He wanted a quick fix, and she was already looking at a timeline he couldn't yet fathom. The junior ranger followed her finger, his gaze scanning the dense forest canopy for something extraordinary. He looked for a hidden marker, a secret path, or perhaps a rare specimen that held the key to his financial woes. He saw only a massive, ancient pine tree, its trunk thick as a boulder, standing solitary near the station edge. He looked back at Emma, his brow furrowed in genuine confusion. "That tree?" he asked, his tone flat with disbelief. "That is just a tree. It does not provide the secret to my account balance." Emma walked to the porch, her boots crunching on the dry needles. She reached out, pressing her palm against the rough, weathered surface of the bark. She did not look at him, but kept her eyes fixed on the height of the branches. "How many years do you think it took to reach this size?" she asked. He shrugged, impatient. 5? Maybe 10? It is just a pine." Emma shook her head, a slow, deliberate movement. "Decades of steady, silent growth," she said. "It did not rush to reach the sunlight. It simply refused to stop growing, year after year." The junior ranger went quiet. The frantic energy that had filled the room vanished, replaced by the heavy, grounding stillness of the forest itself. Emma turned from the pine, her expression steady. She saw the junior ranger still looking at the tree, his mind clearly struggling to reconcile the massive trunk with the small, daily growth of a single needle. "You are looking for a shortcut," she said, her voice low and even. "You think because your contributions are small, they are meaningless." She pulled a small notebook from her pocket and opened it to a page filled with simple, vertical lines. She pointed to a single mark. "This is 1 month. It is nothing. $1 or 10 or 100. It does not matter." The junior ranger leaned in, his eyes tracking her finger as she traced the line upward. "If you wait for a large sum to start, you will never start," she continued. She pressed her thumb against the page. "The size of the deposit is not the engine. The engine is the habit. Doing it when the market is loud, doing it when the market is silent, doing it when you have nothing left over." The junior ranger looked down at his own hands, then back at the forest. The tension in his shoulders finally broke. He stopped looking for the complex algorithm, and started to see the rhythm of the process. He understood that the mountain was not built by a single landslide, but by the relentless accumulation of stone. The passage of time began to shift. Where the first decade felt like a slow, deliberate climb, the second decade accelerated with a life of its own. Emma watched her account statements arrive like seasonal rains. The numbers that once crept upward now surged, propelled by the weight of the years behind them. She did not change her approach. She did not seek new strategies or chase volatility. The market rose and fell, creating headlines of panic and greed, but she remained anchored to her original plan. Every Mo4th, the transfer happened. Every month, the balance climbed. The compounding effect had transcended her own labor. It was no longer about the $200 she set aside. It was about the decades of interest earning interest, a self-sustaining cycle that moved with the inevitability of a river carving through stone. She watched the forest canopy from her ridge, recognizing the same principle at work. An oak does not struggle to grow once it has reached the sunlight. It simply expands. She had reached that stage. The small, invisible fractions of her paycheck had matured into a substantial fortune, and the momentum was now pulling her forward. She was a spectator to her own success, watching as the simple habit of persistence yielded results that felt both inevitable and profound. The final notification arrived on a quiet Tuesday morning. Emma sat at her desk, the screen glowing against the dim light of the station. She clicked the link, the brokerage portal loading with its familiar, clinical speed. She did not scroll through the history. She did not hunt for the gains of the last quarter. She looked directly at the total. $1 million. The number sat there, static and precise. A culmination of 240 months of identical, disciplined actions. She did not cheer. She did not call anyone. She simply pressed the power button, the screen going black, leaving the station in the soft, natural light of the morning. There was no sudden change in her surroundings. The trees remained unchanged. The mountain air held the same chill. She stood up, walked to the window, and looked out over the valley. The goal had been achieved, yet the rhythm of the forest remained the true anchor of her day. She had reached the top of the climb, not through a single, massive leap, but by the relentless, quiet accumulation of years. She turned away from the window, picked up her gear, and headed out toward the trails, exactly as she had done every day for 2 decades. The trail to the ridge remained steep, the soil packed hard by years of patrolling. Emma reached the summit just as the sun broke over the eastern peaks. She stepped onto the familiar flat stone, the same vantage point where she had stood 20 years prior. The valley below was unchanged. The mist clung to the basin, slowly burning off to reveal the dense, green canopy of the forest. She stood perfectly still, her weight evenly distributed, breathing in the thin, sharp air. She looked out toward the horizon, tracing the jagged outline of the mountains that had served as her silent companions. There was no dissonance between her life and the land. The forest grew by adding layer upon layer, season after season, without haste or interruption. She had mirrored this process. She looked down at her hands, then back to the expansive view, feeling the weight of the years settle into a quiet, steady resolve. The wind brushed against her face, carrying the scent of damp pine and cold earth. She stayed there, watching the light shift across the valley floor, acknowledging the harmony of a cycle that had finally come full circle. Everything was exactly where it was meant to be. The sun climbed higher, warming the stone beneath her boots. Emma watched a hawk circle the thermal currents above the pines, its flight path steady and unhurried. She thought of the acorn, the seedling, and the towering canopy. The forest did not rush its growth. It simply persisted through the winter frosts and the summer droughts. Her own path had followed this same quiet rhythm. There were no shortcuts in the mountains, and there had been none in her accounts. The wealth she possessed was not a sudden windfall, but the result of the same consistent, seasonal labor she witnessed in the valley. She looked at the gnarled bark of a nearby cedar, noting the distinct rings hidden within its trunk. Each layer represented a year of survival and expansion. She was no different. The $1 million figure was merely the physical manifestation of her own endurance. She took one last breath of the crisp, mountain air, turned, and began the steady descent back toward the station. The forest stood silent and vast, a permanent testament to the power of showing up, day after day, until the goal was met. She left the ridge, her footsteps measured and deliberate, moving in perfect sync with the landscape that had taught her everything she needed to know.